Containing a breach is only the beginning. Once you've stopped the bleeding, so to speak, you're now faced with an entirely new set of challenges. How do you safely restore operations? How do you know if the threat is really gone? How do you prevent it from happening again? The decisions you make during recovery directly impacts how quickly your business can return to normal. And it makes the difference in whether or not you're going to be dealing with the exact same incident again in a few weeks or a few months. This lesson is about exploring recovery planning and business resilience. These are two interconnected concepts which separate organizations that bounce back quickly from organizations that struggle for months after an incident. Once the threat is contained, the immediate crisis may be over, but now you're looking at systems that might be compromised, data that could be corrupted, and a workforce that has been operating in crisis mode. Everyone's under immense pressure to restore normal operations because every hour of downtime costs money, frustrates customers, and strains your team. Many organizations make a critical mistake at this point because they rush recovery. Sometimes when organizations restore their systems, they also restore the back door attackers have planted. And this is why recovery is a lot more than just restoring from backups. Real recovery requires addressing several interconnected challenges. So obviously you have the first challenge of restoring systems and data safely. There's a fundamental question of what can you trust? If an attacker had access to your systems, you have to assume that anything they could have touched could be compromised. This doesn't only include the systems that showed signs of obvious infection, but it could be your backups as well. Attackers do target the backups. So safe restoration obviously means verifying the integrity of what you're restoring. Rebuilding systems from known good images rather than simply rolling back to a previous state is part of this important process of safe restoration for verifying the integrity of what you're restoring. And if everyone is demanding speed, that doesn't change the fact that you have to be methodical. Now, validating that the threats are actually gone, that the attackers are actually gone, is harder than it sounds. Sophisticated threat actors are going to work to establish multiple persistence mechanisms, precisely because they know you're going to try to remove them, so they want to put in as many potential backdoors as possible. They might have created additional user accounts, modified startup scripts, installed multiple backdoors, or compromised your identity infrastructure. Validation requires thorough investigation. You have to understand exactly how the attackers got in, what they did while they were there, and what mechanisms they might have left behind. You have to do all this before you can be confident your recovery efforts are actually going to stick. The third challenge is managing degraded operations. While in a state of recovery, your organization exists in a strange middle state. The crisis passed, but normal operations have not resumed. You might be running on backup systems, operating with reduced functionality, or asking employees to work around limitations that wouldn't normally exist. In order to manage this degraded state, you need clear communication, realistic expectations, and careful prioritization, meaning which business functions have to be restored first. What can wait? It may seem like nothing can wait, but there's always a way to prioritize certain business functions. Sometimes things are so interconnected that it's very complicated to do that. How do you keep customers informed without oversharing details that could create additional risk? Back to the communication part again. And the fourth challenge is deciding when is it safe to actually return to normal. There's pressure to declare victory, but doing that too early creates real risk. But staying in crisis mode indefinitely is not sustainable. The decision to return to normal has to be based on evidence, not wishful thinking, and not pressure from executives who are tired of dealing with the incident. We're tired of this. You need clear criteria for what safe looks like, and you need to verify that those criteria have actually been met fully. Now, everything I just described becomes much more manageable if you've planned for it in advance, like we've talked about, and that's where recovery planning comes in. Essential elements include prioritizing critical business functions, maintaining backup and restoration capabilities, testing recovery procedures before you need them, establishing RTOs RTOs, recovery time objectives, and connecting to business continuity and disaster recovery. So let's focus on this prioritization of critical business functions. As we've talked about throughout the course, not all systems and processes are equally important, regardless of how they feel or how important they are to the leaders of those areas. Some are essential for your organization's survival. Others are conveniences that you can temporarily live without. Recovery planning starts with understanding these priorities. There are a lot of people who haven't done the analysis and treat all systems as equally important, which means they have no basis for making the difficult prioritization decisions that incidents force upon them. Critical business function analyses questions include things like which processes generate revenue, which are required for regulatory compliance, which protect life and safety, which, if unavailable, would cause cascading failures across the organization. The answers to these questions should drive your recovery priorities. If your payment processing system is down, that probably matters more than your internal newsletter platform, and your recovery plan should reflect that reality. Now, for backup and restoration capabilities, backups are the foundation of recovery capability, but simply having backups is not enough because you have to have backups that are protected from the same threats that might compromise your primary systems. This is where the concept of offline or immutable backups becomes important. If ransomware can encrypt your backups along with your production data, those backups aren't going to help you. You need backup copies that attackers cannot reach, even if they've fully compromised your network. And you also have to actually know how to restore from those backups. A lot of people get caught in that spot. So that goes on to the next point of testing recovery procedures before you need them. A recovery plan that hasn't been tested is just a hypothesis. You're hoping it's going to work, but you don't actually know. An incident is the worst possible time to discover your recovery processes don't work as expected. Testing serves several purposes. It verifies your backups are actually usable, it identifies gaps in your procedures, and it builds muscle memory in your team so they can execute these recovery steps under pressure. The most effective testing happens regularly and simulates realistic scenarios. Tabletop exercises where you walk through hypothetical incidents are valuable, but you should also do actual restoration tests where you recover systems and verify they function correctly. And then the point of RTOs, establishing recovery time objectives. These define how quickly different systems need to be restored. They should be based on your critical business function analyses. More important functions get shorter RTOs, but the key is that your RTOs need to be achievable. Setting an RTO of 2 hours for a system that would actually take 2 days to restore doesn't help anyone. It just means you're going to miss your target during an incident, create additional stress, and potentially unrealistic expectations from leadership. RTOs need to be based on actual tested recovery capabilities, not just wishful thinking. If your current capability doesn't meet business needs, that's a gap you need to address through investment, not by simply writing down a shorter number. And we would think that's obvious. Don't talk down to me. I'm not. We have to say these things because what we're talking about, the things not to do, are commonly done. We all would think that we know these things, but sometimes under the pressure of business reality, people just do what they think they need to do to get by. Next is connecting to business continuity and disaster recovery. And recovery planning doesn't exist in isolation. It should connect to your broader business continuity and disaster recovery programs. Business continuity focuses on maintaining essential functions during disruptions of any kind, not just cyber incidents. Disaster recovery typically addresses large-scale events that affect physical infrastructure. Cyber incident recovery shares many principles with these disciplines, but it has unique considerations around threat elimination and validation. So the most mature organizations integrate these programs, recognizing that a cyber threat might trigger business continuity procedures and that recovery from a cyber event might require disaster recovery capabilities. So these programs should reference each other and be tested together. And now finally for this section, we want to step back and talk about resilience resilience because recovery planning is really about building an organization that can absorb shocks and continue functioning. So we want to think about characteristics that resilient organizations share. They have redundancy built into their critical systems. If one component fails, another can take over. They have people who are cross-trained so that knowledge doesn't exist in only one person's head. And they have relationships with external parties who can provide support during crises. Resilient organizations also learn from incidents. People are not resilient overnight or just magically, they've learned from incidents. Every security event, whether it's a near miss or a significant breach, provides information about vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Organizations who systematically capture and act on these lessons become stronger over time. And a part of resiliency is actually accepting that incidents will happen, not operating under the illusion that defenses are impenetrable. This acceptance drives the investment in the detection, response, and recovery capabilities because leadership understands that prevention alone is not enough. So it's also extremely important to discuss the business case for recovery investment. When you're considering this or communicating with others who need to consider this, there is the cost of extended downtime, which includes lost revenue, recovery expenses, regulatory penalties, customer churn, and reputational damage. And then these costs often scale with the duration of the incident. An organization that can recover in days faces very different consequences than one that's down for weeks or months. It's essential insurance, this investment in recovery capabilities. You're spending money now to reduce the potential magnitude of future losses. And unlike traditional insurance, this investment actually reduces the likelihood and severity of incidents, not just the financial impact after the fact. That's an important point. Organizations with mature recovery capabilities also tend to have better relationships with insurers, regulators, and customers because they can demonstrate that they take security seriously. They don't have to just say it, they can demonstrate it, and that they're prepared for adverse events. This can be a genuine differentiator in competitive markets. So your practical steps forward, if you haven't already, conduct a critical business function analysis. Identify which processes and systems are most essential to your organization's survival and success. And this analysis should be the foundation that drives everything else. Next, evaluate your current backup strategy. Are your backups protected from the same threats that could compromise your production environment? Know for certain that you can restore from them. Usually, there will be issues during the initial restoration tests that you have to sort out. So you have to have those restoration tests first. A lot of times there are various aspects of minutia that can become a huge problem that can prevent restoration when it's time. And restoration is not only about security events, there can be any number of scenarios that can happen where you need to have tested and know you can easily and quickly restore. And then your recovery procedures, when were they last updated? When were they last tested? And do they reflect your current environment and your current threat landscape? And fourth, you need to have honest conversations about your recovery time objectives. Are they realistic? Are they based on actual tested capabilities or on assumptions that haven't been validated? That seems clear, but it hasn't been proven. And then finally, think about resilience more broadly. What single points of failure exist in your organization or in your partner's organization where you have dependencies, in your vendors that you depend on? Now, what would happen if a key person were unavailable during a crisis? And where could you build in redundancy that could help you weather disruptions in association with people, processes, and systems? So recovery planning and business resilience are the final phase of the incident life cycle, but they can't be an afterthought. The work you do to prepare for recovery directly impacts how well your organization weathers security incidents. Organizations that invest in recovery capabilities recover faster, suffer less damage, and emerge from incidents in a stronger position. Those that neglect recovery find containing a breach was just the beginning of their problems. Now, as a business leader, your role is to ensure that recovery planning receives the attention and resources it deserves. The return on this investment may not be visible day to day, but when an incident occurs, and eventually one will, that investment pays dividends that far exceed the cost. In the next lesson, lesson, we're going to talk about learning from incidents, but not just learning from incidents. We'll talk about learning from incidents in a blame-free way and what the issues are with blame-focused reviews versus the blameless post-mortem approach.